Some sounds you can explain: pipes rattling, floors creaking, wind against the windows. But there are other sounds that don't belong, sounds that shouldn't exist, and once you hear them, you can't unhear them. This is one of those stories. I moved into a studio apartment in a converted warehouse building downtown 6 months ago. The rent was cheap, almost suspiciously cheap, but I was broke and desperate. The landlord was a nervous man who barely made eye contact. He handed me the keys, mumbled something about quiet hours, and left before I could ask any questions. The first 3 nights were fine. The apartment was small but clean, hardwood floors, exposed brick, high ceilings. It felt industrial and cool. I slept soundly, but on the 4th night, I woke up at exactly 3:47 a.m. to a sound I couldn't immediately place. At first, I thought it was my own breathing, but then I realized it was coming from somewhere else, somewhere close. I sat up in bed, listening. The sound was rhythmic, slow, a wet, raspy wheeze like someone struggling to breathe through fluid-filled lungs. It was coming from the wall behind my bed. I pressed my ear against the cold plaster and felt it a faint warmth, and with each exhale, I could feel a soft vibration. I told myself it was the heating system. Old buildings make weird noises. I went back to sleep. But the next night, it happened again. Same time, same sound. This time, I got up and inspected the wall. There was a hairline crack running vertically from the floor to the ceiling. I pressed my hand against it and felt warm air pulsing out in steady intervals, like breath. I called the landlord the next morning. He laughed nervously and said the building was over 100 years old. "Old bones creak," he said. "Nothing to worry about." But I was worried, because that night, the breathing was louder, closer, more deliberate. I couldn't sleep. I paced the apartment, phone, flashlight in hand, following the sound. It seemed to move through the walls, shifting from one side of the room to the other. I put my ear to the drywall near the closet and heard it again, unmistakably human. Not mechanical, not pipes. Human lungs, drawing air in and out. A week passed. Every night, the breathing grew louder. I started sleeping with headphones on, blasting white noise. But even then, I could feel the vibrations through the mattress. I began losing my mind. I stopped inviting people over. I barely left the apartment. I was terrified of what might happen if I stayed, but too broke to move. Then, one night, I snapped. I grabbed a hammer from under the sink, marched over to the wall where the breathing was loudest, and swung. The drywall crumbled easily. Behind it wasn't insulation or wiring. It was a crawl space, narrow, dark, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. I shone my flashlight inside. The beam cut through layers of dust and cobwebs, and then I saw them scratches, fresh scratches on the wooden beams, leading deeper into the darkness. Claw marks, human fingernails dragging across the wood. The breathing stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. And then I heard something else. Shuffling. Movement. Something was in there. And it was moving toward me. I dropped the hammer and ran. I didn't pack. I didn't grab my wallet. I just ran. I stayed at a friend's place that night, shaking, unable to explain what I'd seen. I called the landlord and told him I was done. He didn't argue. He didn't ask why. 2 weeks later, I saw it on the news. The police had raided the building after a tenant reported strange noises. They found a man living in the walls. He'd been there for over 6 years. He'd built a network of crawl spaces between the apartments, moving freely through the building. He had notebooks, dozens of them, filled with detailed observations of tenants. What time they woke up, what they ate, when they showered, when they slept. My name was in the most recent notebook. There were sketches of me, sleeping, eating, undressing. He'd been watching me through air vents I didn't even know existed. The police said he was mentally ill, harmless, they claimed. But I know better. Because on the last page of that notebook, written in careful, slanted handwriting, was a single sentence. "She hears me now. Soon she'll see me. I don't live in that building anymore. I don't live in that city anymore. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I still hear it, that slow, deliberate breathing. And I wonder how many others are out there, living in the spaces between our walls, watching, waiting, breathing." We trust systems. Trains run on schedules. Stops are marked. Routes are mapped. But what happens when the system takes you somewhere that doesn't exist? Somewhere you were never supposed to go? This is what happened to me. I was coming home late from a friend's birthday party. It was around 1 a.m., and I was exhausted. I boarded the last subway train heading east. The car was nearly empty, just me, an older woman knitting quietly in the corner, and a guy in a hoodie hunched over his phone. I sat down, leaned my head against the window, and started to drift off. I don't know how long I was out, but I woke up to the screech of the train slowing down. The lights flickered. The intercom crackled to life. The conductor's voice, flat, emotionless, announced, "Last stop. Everyone off." I checked my phone. We were still 3 stops away from my station. I looked around, confused. The woman was already standing, gathering her knitting supplies. The guy in the hoodie stood up without looking at anyone. The doors opened. They both stepped off. I hesitated. This wasn't my stop. But the doors started beeping, that urgent warning sound, and I panicked. I jumped off just before they closed. The train pulled away, and I realized something was very wrong. The platform was dimly lit, the walls covered in chipped, yellowed tiles that looked like they hadn't been cleaned in decades. There were no maps, no signs, no advertisements, just bare concrete and flickering fluorescent lights. I called out to the woman, but she was already walking toward the far end of the platform, moving with purpose. I jogged to catch up, but she disappeared around a corner. I turned back and saw the guy in the hoodie standing near the edge of the platform, staring at the tracks. I approached him, ready to ask where we were. He turned to look at me and I froze. His face was wrong, too smooth, eyes set too far apart. His smile was too wide, stretching unnaturally from ear to ear. He didn't blink. He just stared. And then, without a word, he walked toward a maintenance tunnel and vanished into the darkness. I ran back to the platform edge, looking for the train. But the tracks were different now. Rusted, overgrown with weeds. The metal was orange with decay, like no train had passed through in years. I pulled out my phone. No signal. I tried the exits. Every staircase led to a locked gate, rusted chains, padlocks covered in dust. Hours passed. I was alone. The lights flickered. I sat on a bench, trying to stay calm, trying to think. And then I heard footsteps, echoing from the tunnel. Slow, steady, deliberate. I hid behind a support beam, heart pounding. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall, thin, wearing a conductor's uniform, old-fashioned, from the 1,950 maybe. He was humming a tune I didn't recognize. He walked to the edge of the platform and stopped, staring down at the tracks. His back was to me. I didn't move, didn't breathe. And then, slowly, he turned his head toward me. His face was a blank mask of skin. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. Just smooth, pale flesh. He tilted his head, like he was listening, and then he smiled, or at least, the skin on his face stretched and split, forming a grotesque grin. I ran. I don't remember where. I just ran. Through tunnels, up staircases, down corridors. I don't know how long. I don't know how far. I just ran until I couldn't anymore. When I woke up, I was lying on a bench at my actual stop, fully clothed, phone dead. It was morning. Commuters were walking past me like nothing had happened. I checked my phone when I got home. No missed calls, no messages, like I'd never been gone. But my shoes were caked in rust and dirt, and on the back of my hand, written in red pen, were the words, "You got off too early." I haven't taken the subway since. I've tried to research that station. There's nothing. No records. No abandoned stops on that line. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that humming, and I wonder how many others got off at the wrong stop, and how many of them made it back. Your phone is your lifeline, your connection to the world. But what happens when it becomes a connection to something else? Something you can't explain? Something that knows you better than you know yourself? It was 2:13 a.m. when I got the notification, a voicemail. I was lying in bed, half asleep, phone on the nightstand. I glanced at the screen. The call had come from my own number. My phone was right next to me. I hadn't touched it. The call had lasted 7 seconds. I stared at the screen, heart starting to race. It didn't make sense. I hesitated, then played the message. At first, all I heard was static. Then I heard my voice. But I wasn't speaking. I was crying, gasping for air, sobbing uncontrollably. And then, in the background, I heard my own voice again, whispering frantically, "Don't open the door. Don't open the door. Don't open the door." The message ended with a loud bang, like a gunshot, then silence. I sat up in bed, hands shaking. I checked my call log. The outgoing call was there, sent from my phone at 2:13 a.m., but I hadn't made it. I replayed the message 3 more times, trying to make sense of it. The voice was mine. The crying was mine. But I was here, in bed, safe. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat with my back against the wall, lights on, door locked. Every creak, every sound made me jump. At 3:30 a.m., someone knocked on my door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. Just the empty hallway. I backed away, heart hammering in my chest. My phone buzzed. Another voicemail, from my number. I didn't want to play it, but I had to. I pressed play. This time, my voice was calm, emotionless, cold. "I'm outside. Let me in. It's cold." I dropped the phone. I ran to the window, looked outside. No one. I checked the peephole again. Nothing. I called the police. They arrived 20 minutes later. They checked the hallway, the stairwell, the building entrance. No one. They examined my phone, said it was probably a spoofing app, some kind of prank. They told me to change my passwords, install security apps. They left, but I knew it wasn't a prank. The next morning, I found muddy footprints on my doormat. My shoe size, my tread pattern. I compared them to my shoes. Identical. I checked my phone. There was a new photo in my camera roll. Taken at 3:31 a.m., it was a picture of my front door. From the outside, taken by someone holding my phone. I scrolled through my photos. More images. Dozens of them. All taken while I was asleep. Pictures of me sleeping. Pictures of my bedroom. Pictures taken from angles that didn't make sense, like someone had been standing over me. I deleted everything. I factory reset my phone. I changed my number. I moved out of that apartment 3 days later. I stayed with a friend, too terrified to be alone. But a week after I moved, I got another voicemail. From my new number. I didn't play it. I couldn't. I threw the phone away. Got a new one. A different carrier. A different number. I thought I was safe. Last night, I got another call. 2:13 a.m. From my own number. I didn't answer. But this morning, there was a voicemail waiting. I haven't played it yet. I don't know if I will. But I can see the timestamp. 47 seconds. Just like the first one. I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know who or what is calling. But I know one thing. It's not a prank. It's not a glitch. It's something else. Something that knows me. Something that sounds like me. And I don't think it's going to stop. Night shifts have a certain feeling. The world is quieter, slower, lonelier. But some night shifts aren't just lonely. They're wrong. And once you realize it, it's already too late. I took a job at a 24-hour gas station on the edge of town. I needed the money, student loans, rent, the usual. The manager said it was easy, quiet. Most nights, you'd see 2, maybe 3 customers between midnight and 6 a.m. I could study, watch movies, do whatever. Just keep the place open. Sounded perfect. The first few shifts were exactly as promised. Dead quiet. A trucker here and there. Someone buying cigarettes. Nothing unusual. But on my 5th shift, something changed. It was 2:45 a.m. I was restocking the cooler when I heard the front door chime. I turned around and saw a man standing just inside the entrance. He was soaking wet. His clothes clung to his body, dripping water onto the tile floor. But it hadn't rained in over a week. The night was clear. I walked to the counter. "Can I help you?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at me. His face was pale. His eyes were dark, sunken. He smiled a slow, unnatural smile, and then turned and walked back out. I watched him through the window. He stood in the parking lot, directly under the fluorescent lights, perfectly still. For 20 minutes, he didn't move. Then he walked into the darkness beyond the lot and disappeared. I checked the security footage. Nothing. No car. No sign of where he came from or where he went. The next night, he came back. Same time. Same wet clothes. Same silence. This time, he walked up to the counter and placed a crumpled piece of paper in front of me. I unfolded it carefully. It was a missing persons flyer. Faded. Old. The face on the flyer was his. Reported missing 3 years ago. I looked up. He was gone. I ran outside. The parking lot was empty. I checked the cameras. No footage of him entering. No footage of him leaving. But the paper was still on the counter. Damp. Cold. On the third night, I saw him again. But this time, he wasn't alone. There were others. Dozens of them. All soaking wet. All standing in the parking lot, surrounding the building. They pressed their faces against the glass, staring at me with hollow eyes. I locked the doors. I called the police. The dispatcher said they'd send someone, but the nearest unit was 20 minutes away. I watched the monitors. The figures didn't move. They just stared. And then, at exactly 4 a.m., the lights went out. The building went dark. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight. I crouched behind the counter, trying to stay quiet. I heard the front door creak open. Wet footsteps, dozens of them, moving through the store, slow, methodical. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The footsteps got closer. I could hear water dripping onto the floor. And then, a voice, his voice whispered from directly behind me. "We've been waiting for you." I don't remember what happened next. I woke up in the hospital. The police found me unconscious in the gas station at 6 a.m. They said the door was locked from the inside. The cameras showed nothing. No one entering. No one leaving. Just me, alone, for the entire shift. But the floor was covered in water, puddles everywhere. And on the counter, dozens of missing person flyers, all soaking wet, all people who disappeared near that gas station over the past 15 years. I quit the next day. I don't drive past that place anymore. I don't even drive on that road. But sometimes, late at night, I still feel it, that wet, cold presence standing right behind me. Waiting. I've tried to forget. I've tried to move on. But some things don't let you go. Some things wait. And when they're ready, they come back. Old houses hold memories. Objects hold stories. But sometimes, those stories don't end when we think they do. Sometimes, they're just waiting for someone new to listen. I inherited my grandmother's house after she passed away last spring. It was a beautiful old Victorian, built in the 1892. I'd visited a few times as a kid, but I never spent much time there. My grandmother was a quiet woman. She kept to herself. The house felt the same, quiet, full of shadows and secrets. I started cleaning it out in June, sorting through decades of accumulated belongings, clothes, books, furniture. Most of it went to donation centers. But while I was clearing out the attic, I found something strange. A porcelain doll, sitting alone in a wooden rocking chair, facing the wall. The doll was old, Victorian era, with cracked, glassy blue eyes and a faded lace dress. It looked expensive. I thought it might be worth something, so I brought it downstairs and placed it on a shelf in the guest room. I took a few photos to research it online later. That night, I woke up to the sound of creaking wood, rhythmic, slow, like someone rocking back and forth in a chair. I assumed it was the old house settling. Old houses do that. I went back to sleep. The next morning, I noticed something odd. The doll's head was turned. It was facing the door now. I stared at it, trying to remember if I'd positioned it that way. I must have. I probably bumped the shelf. I left it alone. But the next night, I woke up again. This time, the creaking was louder, closer. I turned on the light and froze. The doll was at the foot of my bed, standing upright, its arms at its sides, its eyes locked on me. I jumped out of bed, grabbed the doll, and threw it back in the attic. I locked the door. I shoved a chair under the handle. I tried to convince myself I'd been sleepwalking, that I'd moved it myself without realizing. But the noises didn't stop. Every night, I heard them. Scratching, tapping, laughter, a child's laughter, high-pitched and echoing through the walls. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. I went back up to the attic, hammer in hand, ready to destroy the thing and end this nightmare. The doll was sitting in the rocking chair again, facing the wall. But now, there was something new. Written on the wall behind it, in black crayon, were the words, "She's not gone." I grabbed the doll, carried it outside, and threw it into a metal barrel in the backyard. I doused it in lighter fluid and set it on fire. I watched it burn, watched the porcelain crack and blacken, watched the lace dress disintegrate. I stayed there until there was nothing left but ash. I went to bed that night feeling relieved. Finally, it was over. But the next morning, I found it sitting on my front porch, unburned, untouched, smiling. I moved out 3 days later. I didn't take anything. I left the furniture, the boxes, everything. I sold the house as is to a cash buyer who didn't ask questions. I don't know what happened to the doll. I don't want to know. But last week, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a Polaroid photo. It was my new apartment, my living room, taken from inside. And sitting on my couch, in the center of the frame, was the doll. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it's following me. But I know one thing, it's not going to stop. Some things aren't meant to be inherited. Some things choose you.